Hey now! It's another day, and you know what that means. It means Vox is writing another article blaming sexism and racism for the reason that 4 white male candidates are leading the polls for the Democrat primary right now. It can't possibly be that people just like those candidates more because they're charismatic or they have name recognition or because of their policies. No, you silly fools. How naive can you be? It's because you're sexist and racist. And this one is no less written by Ezra Klein himself, the guy who runs Vox. And if you've listened to my live streams before, you know it's someone I really don't like. But let's take a look at this article. Kate Manne on why female candidates get ruled unelectable so quickly. Electability isn't a static social fact. It's a social fact we're constructing. Well, I mean, obviously, electability isn't a static fact. It's always changing upon what the circumstances at the time are. In her book, Down Girl, The Logic of Misogyny, philosopher Kate Manne defines misogyny not as an emotion men feel, but as an environment women experience and a way in which they're judged. It's a powerful twist, and one that does a lot to help explain the Democrat primaries so far. This is the trick that the social justice people always engage in, okay? They're going to redefine a term so that it no longer has anything to do with the intention of the supposed oppressor. It has entirely only to do with the experience of the victim. So if you redefine misogyny so that it no longer has anything to do with what a man feels or intends, but is entirely about what a woman experiences, then there's no way to deny it. There's no way to question it, because you can't deny what some individual experiences in their day-to-day life. So Kate Manne is basically redefining misogyny in a way to just automatically validate her argument and dismiss anything that could possibly counter it. That's what this is. The traditional definition of misogyny is hatred of women. To Manne, it is kind of ironic that her name is Manne and she's some big-time feminist. This definition is senseless, giving the social structures misogyny needs to describe. Take Gilead, the totalitarian world imagined in the novel and Hulu series The Handmaid's Tale. In the story, every woman in a totalitarian society is expected to play a submissive role. If women fulfilled them, what need would there be for the men of that world to hate the women in their lives? Perhaps the women of Gilead are adored by the men they soothe and serve, but would anyone fail to describe the world, one where women are not allowed to read or work, as built atop a powerful, totalizing form of misogyny? This is a terrible example of her concept, because you can't say that if you have someone who's literally a slave or a second-class citizen, you can't say, oh, well, as long as they're being enslaved by me and doing what I tell them, then I adore them. That's not real adoration for an individual. That's not real love, okay? That is a type of hatred. If you only like someone when they're literally your slave and following you unquestioningly and you treat them like crap, that's not love. That is a form of hatred. It's baffling to me that you try to redefine slavery in such a bizarre context like that. Manne sees misogyny as a social enforcement mechanism, where women tend to encounter hostility because they're not conforming to gendered roles and expectations. Yeah, okay. There are some people that are actually sexist. We still see the tradcons who are like, women must be in the kitchen and they must be cooking and they must be raising children and they shouldn't be able to get jobs and, blah, 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 blah. Those people are in the minority, okay? You don't see that very often. I don't think you can say without evidence that that's some sort of huge impact on society right now. I mean, Hillary Clinton, last election, was running for president and almost won. She did win the popular vote. She just didn't win the Electoral College. So I don't see how there's some giant misogynist social enforcement mechanism going on in America. Also interesting is that this is the exact reason I don't support non-binary, because that's all non-binary is a reinforcement of gendered stereotypes and gender roles. Because if you're non-binary, what you're saying is, I'm not a woman because I don't conform to the stereotype of female gender roles. So therefore, I'm this other gender. So it's like, okay, but then that means you're ceding the definition of female to the stereotype. That's all you're doing when you adapt a non-binary gender. You're saying, oh, you can only be male or female if you exist as a stereotype. And that's why I really can't stand and don't support the non-binary genders whatsoever. Just identify as a man or a woman, but just say, look, I'm not going to be boxed in by some stereotype of what that means. That's a much healthier, better way to progress in our society than to just give up. In her telling, misogyny isn't about hatred. It's about protecting an existing social order, and it often works quietly and subtly. That's what the Kate Biddles and all those people say about racism too. They say, oh, it's not about hatred, it's a zero-sum game of protecting resources. And it happens quietly and subtly, and it happens in the unconscious mind, and therefore, when people say they're not racist, you can't really trust them. We're creating this definition so that it can never be found, it can never be proven, it can never be solved, basically, is what's going on. It's why a woman boss is quicker to be judged cruel than a male boss. It's why a woman running for a leadership position can be ruled out for offenses that would never be noticed if a man committed them. It's interesting because they deny or they ignore, I guess, that it goes both ways. Men and women are treated differently in America. I'm not going to deny that. But a perfect example of that was the last election with Hillary and Trump. So many people make fun of the way Trump looks, okay? Orange Cheeto, his hair, his tiny hands, which is obviously a dig that he has a tiny manhood. The interesting thing is you can insult the way Trump looks, you can insult the way a man looks all day and all night. You can't insult the way a woman looks, because if you do, you're called sexist. If Trump made fun of the way Hillary looked, if people made fun of the way Hillary looked at all, they would be labeled as sexist. Interestingly, it's because there's still this sexist idea in people's minds that women are more valued for their appearance and men are more valued for whatever they do. So therefore, it's acceptable to make fun of a man's appearance because society doesn't deem it as important. So all the people who say it's sexist to make fun of Hillary or another female politician's appearance are actually, ironically, the ones that are being sexist here. Not that you should obviously make fun of candidates' physical appearances. Ad homs. I spoke with Man for my podcast a few months ago. It's one of my favorite episodes. You should check it out. Maybe me and Adam will. But I've been thinking a lot about her work as the Democratic primary has played out, and as a crop of exciting female candidates have struggled in comparison to less experienced, less specific male candidates. And so I called her to get her to take on the race as it's developed so far. Gee, you think the woman that thinks everything is sexist and misogyny is gonna think that the reason the women are losing the primary in the polls right now is because of sexism and misogyny? I wonder what she's gonna think about that. Electability isn't a static social fact. It's a social fact we're constructing, she told me, and my worry is electability is a smokescreen for this sadly common thing, which is not wanting to support a female candidate. I guess that's why Hillary won the primary last time. Because everyone was just so sexist and so misogynist, right? Or did all the sexism just spread in the last 3 years that Trump's been president? Trump is just so sexist that even the Democrats that don't support him are infected by his sexism just by him being president. How is misogyny as you define it in evidence in the 2020 primary so far? Yes, as you define it, in a way that can't be verified or critiqued. Basically, Kate Mann wants you to think of misogyny as faith, okay? You can't question it, it can't be verified, you just gotta believe in what the person experiences. Because I think of misogyny as a hostility women face, rather than a psychological property men feel, I think it's been coming across pretty clearly in the population-level patterns of how much support female candidates are getting compared to white male candidates. It's depressing to watch the 4 Bs, Biden, Bernie, Beto, and Buttigieg, rise in the polls and generate enthusiasm beyond the substance that may be there while women trail behind them with no plausible explanation for why we see that striking pattern. It's also possible it's just due to the female candidates being less exciting, but I have a hard time believing it in this race. Okay, of course, everyone that complains about this at Vox ignores the fact that, and I talked about this in my last video on my main channel, that when Kamala Harris declared herself as running, she was the chosen one. Everyone was so excited. They're all like, this is it. She's the one that's going to defeat Trump, okay? She's a woman. She's not white. She's perfect. But what happened? Oh, Turned out she was boring and not charismatic, so everyone kind of lost interest. But no, it's the fault of the misogynist white male for her not being exciting. And also, this is ignoring the fact that these people forget, I guess, that this is what happens literally every presidential cycle, okay? Every time there's a primary, you have a candidate declares itself, they're new and fresh, exciting, they get a bump in the polls because the media is talking about them, and then after a few days or weeks or months, everyone gets bored with them, and then another new candidate pops up, and then they get all the press for a while, and they go up in the polls for a while. This is what happens literally every 4 years, and yet apparently Kate Mann and Ezra Klein forgot. This is what happens every 4 years. I'm interested in how the general environment women face filters down into the individual cases, because there's always an explanation, right? Warren had the DNA stumble. Klobuchar had stories about staff mistreatment. How do you track the linkage between misogyny and these varied campaigns and stories? Yes, how do you blame misogyny when all these people have legitimate reasons for why people don't like them? Like Elizabeth Warren's DNA thing, which totally ruined her chances, in my opinion. And Klobuchar, who, honestly, I barely know anything about and barely hear anyone talking about her. And if you ever listen to her speak, she's very, very, very not charismatic. I mean, she just literally had a Jeb Bush please clap moment.
And every single time I have run, I have won every single congress, including Michelle Bachmann's, okay? It's when you guys are supposed to cheer, okay?
Let me give you one specific case. I'd be the last person to suggest we shouldn't be concerned about Amy Klobuchar's treatment of her staff. We should take seriously the reports making a case she was abusive. But at the same time, I've been concerned since 2016 that Bernie Sanders has a similar staff problem. A former subordinate called him unbelievably abusive. There was a piece about his anger management problem. It's not that there aren't any serious criticisms of women that should be talked about and debated, but often men get away with similar behavior that doesn't register as a real problem. Now, Kate's ignoring the fact that it's not just that Klobuchar was accused of being abusive. It's that she's accused of being abusive when no one on the national stage knows anything about her. So the first thing they hear about her is, oh, this woman was abusive to her staff. So that paints a huge picture of the person, while Bernie has like this huge identity on the national stage already. So someone coming out and saying that he's abusive, it's not going to have the same impact. Not to mention, this is just dumb anyway, because Bernie's a huge deal. Everyone in the country knows who he is. No one knows who Amy Klobuchar is. That's the real reason why the polls are the way they are. That's how you get all these people to shut up. When the people that do these polls, they need to actually ask, do you even know anything about all these other candidates? They don't know who these other people are. I'm glad you brought up Klobuchar, because I was thinking of your book often as I followed that story. One of the things that struck me was that Klobuchar's office has one of the highest staff turnover rates in the Senate, so that's evidence of something real going on in her management. But of the 10 Senate offices with the highest turnover, 7 are run by women, despite the fact that there are far more men than women in the Senate. That's hilarious. One way of interpreting that is that women bosses are simply worse. But another way of interpreting that, due to the kinds of gender expectations you described, people experience the same behavior from a female boss differently than they experience it from a male boss. For Rahm Emanuel, a difficult, abrasive management style becomes part of his mythology. For a female boss, the same style might be proof of their villainy. It's not just the behavior itself, but how we experience it, and what we're willing to put up with and from whom. Now, it is hilarious to me that 7 of the 10 highest turnover offices in the Senate are for women. And look, he's probably right to some degree. We do interpret behaviors differently depending on whether the person is male or female. And there is a thing, and it is true, I do believe it is true, that men are able to act in a more aggressive way in leadership and still be viewed in a positive light. It seems to me plausible that due to our expectations that women will be caring, loving, and nurturing, women have a much harder time practicing a tough management style. Even if you assume that style is morally valid, I think it's likely a woman would be considered a bitch for it, while the man would be likelier to have staff think of him as tough. These gendered expectations will inform who's seen as over the line and even where the line is placed. It's interesting because people like Ezra and all the far left, they constantly, in the past, they complain about that they want the world to be a kinder, gentler place. You know, they don't want this tough love anymore. They don't want anyone to be offensive anymore. They want to sand all the rough edges off the world. But then, if you have a female who's on the left, who's engaged in that same kind of abusive, angry, quote-unquote toxic masculine behavior, who's a leadership position, and people don't like it, oh, well, we shouldn't criticize it. We should say, oh, well, they just don't like it because they're sexist. When a woman's doing that behavior, it's not a problem. There's another part of the Klobuchar story I've been thinking about, given your framework, and this is delicate. But Amy Klobuchar has profited from her reputation as the nicest senator. Well, see, there you go again. That's another reason why a staffer coming out saying she's abusive would be extra damaging to her, because she already has a reputation of being nice, supposedly. It's like when no one cares when people come out and say, oh, working for Trump is, terrible, or he's abusive, or whatever. It's like, okay, we all could guess that from the way he acts in public. It's not a surprise to anyone. Trump never branded himself as being a nice guy. She was really well liked by her colleagues. She got Brett Kavanaugh to apologize to her. In a way, she had mastered the gendered expectations for female politicians. So then when it came out that she wasn't treating her staff the way in private, it was held against her with much more force. See, this is why I really don't like Ezra. Okay, he's a smart guy. He understands what's going on here. He sees that there are other reasons for this that don't have to rely on sexism. He's bringing them up. But he's bringing them up because he wants Kate to knock them down. He's not bringing them up in any sort of honest fashion. Yes, like she was somehow hypocritical, rather than someone under enormous pressure to perform in a way coded as acceptable for women in public. And it sounds like she would lose her temper in ways that can be criticized, but can also be judged with nuance. Whereas someone like Sanders, no one is that surprised if he's difficult to work with because he comes across as somewhat angry and curmudgeonly, and that's much better tolerated in men. I mean, isn't that part of the game for every politician? I mean, I'm assuming every politician's under enormous pressure, okay? I assume being president is an enormously, stressful job, and being able to maintain your cool while under that pressure and under that stress is part of the qualification of what you want in a good president. I mean, remember, that was part of what everyone liked about Obama so much, that he always seemed, at least in public, to retain his cool. But no, if we're talking about a woman, you need nuance. And also, I just haven't even heard this many stories about Bernie Sanders supposedly being difficult to work with. So I don't think the mainstream public has that impression of him anyways. Do you see echoes of how Hillary Clinton was treated in how Elizabeth Warren has been treated in the conversations over her electability? Note, I had this conversation with Maine before the CNN town hall where Warren was asked if she was being Hillaried. What are they talking about? Hillary won in 2016. She won the primary. What are they talking about? No one thought, people weren't saying Hillary doesn't have, Hillary's not electable in 2016. Everyone's saying that she was a sure win. Everyone's like, no, she's going to win 100%. Everyone thought that there was no way she was going to lose to Trump. What is he talking about? What are these people talking about? I've seen echoes. People always say they want substance, but when it's a woman bringing it, it seems unexciting. My worry is electability is a smokescreen for this sadly common thing, which is not wanting to support a female candidate. It seems to me that the she's not electable excuse could be just that, an excuse. Now, she's kind of right in that I don't think most people care about substance when it comes to their political candidates. They want someone that inspires them. They want someone that makes them feel a certain way, because our emotions are always stronger than the quote-unquote unemotional intellectual thoughts that rattle around our brains. So yes, you could have a female candidate who has all the best policies in the world, but if she doesn't have the emotion and charisma to inspire, it's going to be hard for her to get anywhere. And I think that's going to be Yang's big problem, which of course, they're not going to talk about Andrew Yang whatsoever, because Andrew Yang is 100% a policy guy. He's kind of funny in like a subtle way, but he's not like some sort of super charisma magnet. So I'm afraid he's not going to get a lot of traction for that. But they're not going to talk about Andrew Yang. They're not going to bring him up whatsoever. And also, I bet they're not going to bring up Tulsi Gabbard either, who was a female, who wasn't white, and yet the mainstream media completely did everything they could to try to destroy her the second she declared herself as a candidate. And why is that? Why did they all try to attack her? Even Vox wrote an article by our friend Zach Beauchamp, who wrote the terrible Jordan Peterson hit piece. He wrote, Tulsi Gabbard, the controversial long-shot Democrat 2020 candidate, explained how she went from rising star to controversial figure. So when all the left-wing mainstream media attacked Tulsi Gabbard for not being quote-unquote progressive enough, was that sexism or was that something else? The argument I hear the most is the DNA thing, but then I think about the other candidates considered electable. Donald Trump does 20 insane things before breakfast. Joe Biden plagiarized a speech from Neil Kinnock. Bernie Sanders used to be a quite radical leftist. Beto had his live journal period. Buttigieg is a mayor of a mid-sized city. Okay, maybe I have to take back what I said about Ezra being smart, because this is so dumb and this is so stupid. Let's break this down one at a time. Okay, the thing with Elizabeth Warren and the DNA, and the reason it was so harmful, was because it got so much news. Trump even gave her a nickname about it. And then she kept screwing up, because it wasn't just like, oh, she wrote in our college, admission that she was Native American. She could have just said, oh, I thought I was, and then I wasn't. My mistake. No, she had to keep running with it. She had to go and get a DNA test. And then when the DNA test showed that she was wrong, she didn't just not talk about it. She broadcast to everyone that she completely screwed up. And it was so weird. It was a huge story. The entire country was like, what are you doing, Elizabeth? So to compare that to Donald Trump doing crazy things, which is literally why the people wanted him in the first place, and to Joe Biden plagiarizing a speech from some guy who I don't think anyone outside of the news knows about or cares about, to Bernie Sanders being quite radical, which again, like Trump, is why people like him, to Beto apparently having a live journal, and to Buttigieg being a mayor of a mid-sized city, what does that have to do with being made a mockery of on the national level? It has nothing to do with each other. Obama was a junior senator for like 2 years before he became president, and Trump wasn't any politician whatsoever before he became president. This is the dumbest comparison ever. The decision of whether or not something has made someone electable seems really loaded to me. You can imagine saying, you can't elect an orange buffoon, you can't elect a plagiarist, but it turns out you can. It seems to me the bar for what makes you unelectable is lower with women. Again, Hillary won the popular vote in 2016. She beat all the men that were running against her for the Democratic primary too. Okay, so how come she made it? How come the bar wasn't lower for her? That's a really good way of thinking about it. Of course it is. Something that agrees with me is a very good way of thinking about it. And it brings out this dimension I worry about with female candidates, which is the detection of a fatal flaw comes out early and decisively. I think we see it with Kamala Harris too, with the conversation over her record as a prosecutor. I take that criticism seriously. I think Warren made a real gaffe with the DNA thing. The question is, are these flaws fatal, or are they mistakes a candidate learned from? Now we have Biden making jokes about having permission to hug someone on stage, seeming to have learned nothing. The fatal flaw test is more brutally when applied to women. Okay, I'm so glad she said this, because it shows she has absolutely no understanding whatsoever about what's going on in politics and what's going on in society right now. It's not necessarily about the screw up, the original screw up that someone makes. It's about how they react to it. Joe Biden going on stage and making a joke about hugging someone is brilliant. That's how you deal with these issues. You don't apologize endlessly and mea culpa, because that just makes you seem weak and pathetic and lame, and no one wants that. Didn't she realize that's why so many people like Trump? Because he wouldn't apologize for anything. And the fact that Kate doesn't realize this means, why is anyone listening to her and her views about society and her views about the world? She doesn't even understand this simple, basic fact about politics right now. Okay? You don't apologize for anything. It's tricky because often there's a real element of truth to the criticism. It's tricky for me to shape them around my views that everyone's sexist, because, often there's truth to the fact that maybe there's a reason they don't like this candidate, and has nothing to do with sexism. It's just that one often sees men get away with similar behavior and worse without any consequences. It's really frightening. There's a culture of canceling women. The fact that many people thought Hillary Clinton was a sure thing may be part of the reason she lost the election. Even Hillary being thought of as a sure... This whole article, they've been like, oh, they're saying women can't be electable. Women can't be electable. And then even when we have last election, everyone thought the woman was going to win 100%. Oh, that's still evidence of sexism. Somehow, it still perfectly aligns with her view that everything is just sexist and misogynist. What a twist.